Hello, everybody. Oh, wait, we had a book in front of us. Hi, everybody. It's John Marcotte from Heroic Girls. We are here again on a Sunday to do our monthly book club. With me today is Vanessa Yee, a new person to the book club. We are here talking about, let's see what we got back here. Laura Dean Keeps Breaking Up With Me by Mariko Tamaki, and I keep forgetting her name, Rosemary Valero-O'Connell. She has a long one. I want to make sure I got all the pieces of it right.
Right.
It's a fantastic book. I really enjoyed it. Let's just do that first. How were your first reactions to the book reading through?
Well, first of all, can I just say Happy Father's Day to you, John?
Oh, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I just feel like let's pause and acknowledge that you're doing this on your day. Which I mean, as a father, I feel like it's amazing that you've kind of created this platform.
Yeah,
exactly.
that is where it started. So
Yeah. Oh, wow. All right. Well, I think I really like this book. I've read
yeah,
some of Mariko's other novels, and this one was both that kind of she like lingers on a lot of things, and I'm
yeah.
not sure if that's something that she develops with artists, but it was also a really fast read.
Nope, you're breaking up just a little bit,
Like I
Vanessa. Uh,
am I breaking up?
yeah, you were, and now you're back.
Whew. Okay.
Yeah. All right. So hopefully that was just a temporary glitch in the matrix, and we'll be good.
Right. It didn't want me to say too many gushy things about the novel
Yeah.
itself, but I no, I was just saying that it was such a fast read, and I'm curious how you also read through it. Like, are you somebody who reads like slowly and scans through the pages? Are you someone like I want to read the plot and then go over it
I'm
again?
I'm the latter. I devour the book first. I just motor through because I'm plot driven and I want to get through that book. And particularly graphic novels, then I will go back through a second time and linger on the art more, which sometimes I've passed by. We want to apologize. We couldn't get an electronic version of this book because it is not from one of the big two or three and not available everywhere. So we have pages, but they're getting brought up as individual pictures, and it's going to take us a while to pull them up. So, yeah, this was a book that it's a longer book. It's probably one of the longer graphic novels we've read, but it is also one that I finished in one setting easily, just no problem at all. I wasn't putting it down. Um, yeah, it's an amazing work of storytelling. I wanted to bring up one thing, because mine has a sticker. It won the Prince Award for Excellence in Young Adult Literature from the American Librarian Association,
Mm-hmm.
and well deserved. That's a an award that is not necessarily given to graphic novels. It's given to all young adult literature, and I
Oh,
love it when comic books break through those barriers and are considered in the same category as other types of literature because
sure.
it is a very valid form of literature.
Oh,
So,
absolutely. Yeah.
um, we don't have Vivian here. Vivian's normally our go-to on art because she is so good. She
Oh,
comes up with
yeah.
stuff I'll never. But I'm gonna try. Well, you know what?
Yeah.
Actually, I forgot our beginning. We should sum up what the book is about for people who
Oh,
haven't.
yeah. Let's
Light
start
spoilers.
from
Uh,
the very
yeah,
beginning.
I'll start from the very beginning. Laura Dean keeps breaking up with me. So the story follows this girl, Freddie, who is an out lesbian in high school, living in Berkeley. And she has there's Freddie, some character sketches. She has a on and off again girlfriend named Laura Dean, who is just the coolest kid in school, who is everybody is she's super popular and she feels honored that she even like noticed her at the beginning and everything like that. But what we find out almost immediately is that Laura Dean keeps breaking up with her. She keeps standing her up, treats her badly, breaks up with her, and then but strings her along a little bit, and then they get back together, and then breaks up with her again. And it's obvious that one of them is far more committed to this relationship than the other, too much to Freddie's detriment. Not only does is Laura a bad girlfriend in general, but she, because of her demands on Freddie and how all-consuming the obsession with her becomes, it makes Freddie a worse person because she doesn't honor her commitments to other people. It just drags her away from being herself. So this is a book it's a, I guess you could technically put it in the romance category, but it's about toxic relationships, which there aren't too many books like that. Normally, if you're telling a story about romantic relationships, you know,
Hmm.
it's all happily ever after, rainbows and unicorns. That is not
Oh
this
yeah.
book. Quite the opposite.
Right.
So yeah, so it tracks the book, and the narration structure they use is a series of letters to an advice columnist that Freddie is
Hmm.
writing, going through detailing everything that has been happening in her relationship with Laura Dean. And so, and at the end, we get a resolution where I think Freddie was on this path herself, but we also get the advice columnist telling her, you know, giving her some advice about the nature of breakups and relationships and what you need to do there. So I don't want to give too much away because I think if you haven't read this book, you really should go read the book. I don't want to spoil the ending, but fantastic book. Did I hit all the salient plot points? I think there was
Absolutely. And
for a
I'm
high
always
level.
like curious how people do it without giving away plot points. And I think what you've done is just kind of expanded on the book jacket. And I think that's a
Yeah,
perfect summation. And um, wow, there's a lot to go into. So I'm sure going to just keep this one moving. But like the fact that it's coming of age, it's about toxic relationships. I mean, it feels really modern, but it's also very timeless in some ways because it's
yeah,
reaching into a lot of canon from other places to kind of
right.
give us like a vision.
Up. You
Also just like everybody's got phones, like a lot of this happens through text, right? You were saying that some of the framing devices
right.
an advice column, but it's an email, right?
Yeah,
Like it's not like Dear
right.
Abby or anything like that. So in some ways it's always calling back. It kind of makes me think like, you know, the more things change, the more they stay the same. Like we're always going to have
Right.
toxic folks. And you know, one of the huge differences here too is like the amount of like LGBTQ plus folks. It's also
Yeah.
Pride Month. Happy Pride. You know, there are also gender queer folk, and there's
Yeah.
also like women and women identifying folk who are like differently sized, and I think
Yeah.
that's one thing that like even though Vivian's not here, like her presence is still with us, right? Like and she's always telling me like, oh, look at how this person's drawn, like that's unnatural, like. And one thing she said immediately to me about this one in particular, she was like,
Right.
everybody looks like a normal person, you know. And
Yeah.
I think some of that is owed to like even just the character design. I don't know if you've heard of Strangers in Paradise.
Oh, Terry
um
Moore. Have them all right
yeah.
over here somewhere. Beautiful
Yes.
book. I like you already.
Oh, thank you. Well, I mean, like Terry Moore, like
Yeah.
I don't know, like it when it came on the scene, everybody's like, oh, gasp, you know, like a girl
Right.
who's like regular sized, you know, it's two lesbians. It almost felt like a very Xena Gabrielle
Yeah.
like dynamic, but they switched the dynamic, you know, there's like
Right.
gangsters and things like that. But I think, you know, the two main romantic leads felt like almost drawn from that, you know, and then
Right.
you know some of the stuff that I think is happening that makes it a little bit timeless is that she flops down on her pillow and she says sigh, right? And I
Right.
think we'll get into the color aspects of it later, but it reminded me of Roy Lichtenstein's kind of like
Oh
um,
yeah.
oh yeah, the crying girl and stuff
Yeah.
like that, right?
No, no, yeah, I completely get that. The that pop art, uh, that kind of iconic emotion through a four color print, where Lichtenstein would zoom in so you could see all the dots in it. But yeah, we had that kind of expressiveness. A couple things I wanted to note about the setting. You mentioned the LGBTQ plus representation. What I loved about that is, number one, she's living in the gayest world I've ever seen. I mean,
Yeah,
there are very few straight people that exist in this world, which is fine. I mean, heck, it's not like we're underrepresented elsewhere. I'm fine with that. That's good. But I enjoyed that for much the same reason I think people enjoyed Schitt's Creek. Is that I think we
mm,
have seen the gay stories about gay people being oppressed and picked on and their life being
right,
miserable far too many
right,
times. And
right,
we are moving into a world where there are places, it's not everywhere, and there's certainly lots of problems out there, but I do think that these kind of stories exist out there in the world now in a way that they didn't when I was a kid,
mm-hmm,
and that you can be out as a teenager and the world around you can be fairly accepting of it depending on where you live. And Berkeley is probably
right,
one of the places where that's going to be most likely.
right.
Oh yeah, that also reminds me. She works at the lesbian diner, and I don't know if we ever got a name for the lesbian diner, but
Sure.
every special is named after an out lesbian, which is just a great reoccurring gag because
Oh,
you're trying to
right.
decode the names in the background. I was constantly thinking when they pull up a special, trying to figure out which famous lesbian they were talking about,
Right.
and and that's just a fun detail.
I feel like the author and the artist had so much fun writing this book. Like, I'm the type of person who's like reading the acknowledgments. So it seemed
Right,
like, Rosemary had admired Mariko from afar. And,
right,
like, I don't know if we'll get a chance to go into, because there's so much already here, but like some
right.
of Mariko's stuff before, like Skim, like, is
Yeah.
definitely about this like coming of age, like slower paced, like how do I deal with all these feelings and
Hmm.
emotions? How do I do this in a way that's like I'm maturing and moving
Right.
forward? Um, and it's this one I felt like because it has elements of this like ongoing joke, it like
Yeah.
lightens it a bit of like 'cause Skim itself is like very, very serious. Like
Hmm.
um I don't recommend it because of some of the themes like to younger kids except
Right.
as like a guided experience, but I think and this one summer, right, which
Oh
deals
yeah.
with divorce and stuff like
I
that. So yeah,
I
you've
met
read
her
it, right?
for that. Yeah, and I have some.
Oh,
That's a signed one on the shelf because I met her for that
yes.
tour. She came through.
Oh
Fantastic book.
yeah,
Yeah.
right. But I think like when you have those little moments that like of those gags
All right.
that kind of like lift the book a little bit, like it's like makes it even more of a pleasure to read, along with trying to track Freddie as she's like going through this, like, we've all gone through relationships like that where it's like,
Right.
okay, she's just not that into you kind
Right.
of thing, and you have to figure out if you value yourself enough to
Yeah,
exit the
and
situation.
it's like watching that slow motion car crash, and Freddie is completely aware of how messed up everything is, but can't make herself break this cycle of kind of abuse that she's getting from Laura Dean, and she's trashing all the other relationships in her life in service of her relationship to Laura Dean, and Laura Dean just does not care about her that much, doesn't love her the way she deserves to be loved, and this is just one of the more brutally honest books I've read in a long time. This is a non-sugar-coated version of love that I think would actually be pretty important for teenagers to read, to understand that
Yeah.
you can love somebody, but that doesn't mean they're good for you, and
Oh, sure.
that it. I enjoyed that aspect of it, the kind of like Verde. I mean, we all have known, if we haven't been in this kind of relationship ourselves, we've all had a friend that fell into one of these relationships, and you were sitting on the outside wanting to pull them out, and you couldn't figure out how to do it, which is kind of a pattern that exists in this book too.
Right.
Um, so I did want to talk about Rosemary Valero-O'Connell's art here a little bit. I think I've
Yes,
only read
please.
one other thing by her. She did a couple issues of Lumberjanes, which is another book I read.
Oh
Um,
yeah,
yeah, so
absolutely.
she did at least one or two one-offs that were like solo issues. So she's probably drifting around Boom doing other things, if I had to guess.
Hmm.
The art, the first thing I wanted to talk about is how much of the story is carried by the art. People get
Mm,
confused about comics and they think, oh, it's just, there's so few words, so you're not getting as much story
right.
as you would in a book. A real book has more words.
Right.
Uh, there are pages that have no dialogue that are telling a story. That
Oh yeah.
she is uh, she's an artist and she had a writer with her that gave her that space to do that. But there are places where the art is completely carrying the story. We're learning about things by just looking at the pictures and absorbing
Mm,
that detail. It's a perfectly valid way to get information about the story. It's like a movie when nobody talks for a while. That doesn't mean nothing's happening.
yeah.
And just a fantastic. I think writers sometimes like to hear their own voice, so you get every panel's filled with word balloons and things. There's a lot of space here for the art to tell the story, and she does a fantastic job of doing it. And just like setting of time, she's in this teenager, right on the cusp of transferring from being a kid to being an adult. She's right
Yeah.
in that in that in-between years. And one of the ways that we see that and that I love is that if you look at her room, she has all these stuffed animals and things around there. We at
Right.
some point find out that she and her best friend Doodle, who is an awesome character, go to thrift shops and buy like old beat up dolls and stuffed animals and then sew them together and make like Sid from Toy Story monstrosities that they leave around the room.
Yeah.
But they're actually omniscient narrators. If you look, throughout the book, whenever they're on panel, at some point we get a little word balloon coming out from those. They're commenting on things that are happening in Freddy's life, and I thought that was a really cool detail. And I liked the fact that that she's at the age where she still might have a room full of these kind of what most people would consider a little bit more childish things, stuffed animals and things like that. That felt very real when you're in that transition period. At some point, they go away in a box, and that hasn't happened for her yet.
What do you? I wanted to ask about that because, like, I wasn't sure at first how to feel about it, and I think I have a theory about why they do that. But and I would, I'm going to come back to Rosemary for sure because I was
Yeah,
just stunned.
yeah,
Like I'm like you, like I kind of like read through it really quickly, but I also, um, I actually felt like I had to stop,
right.
and breathe and look at all the images. But
Sure.
like the whole thing with the stuffed animals, like it threw me for a bit because I was
Yeah,
like, this feels like extra text. Like I'm more, my life isn't very minimalist, but like when I'm reading the page, I like things to be minimal and like
right,
just to concentrate in on one thing. But then you had these like it was almost manga like where it's like
right.
these little blip blip blip. Like
Yeah.
what did you think? Like did you enjoy that or
The commentary from the stuffed animals.
yeah,
It was interesting. I was trying to figure out what we were supposed to take from that. So it some sort of interior monologue revealing thoughts that Freddy was having, because they're Freddy's stuffed animals, or are we supposed to fully anthropomorphize these things as if we're in Toy Story and they really are there? I think they
right,
revealed
right.
something about Freddy. That was kind of what I was thinking, is that it's parts of Freddie commenting on her situation from an external position, so
Hmm.
that in a way that she wasn't able to do herself. The the one thing that I noticed that was a neat little detail about those stuffed animals is they're a running thing throughout the book, and Freddie doesn't usually even acknowledge that they are there or that they're saying anything.
Hmm.
I don't know if she ever does, to be honest. And then at the very end of the book, she and Doodle are together, and there's one of them clipped to the back of Doodle's backpack, and it says something, and Doodle comments on it. If you look, the book ends with Doodle hearing the stuffed animal too.
Oh my
So
gosh.
it's just a very cool thing. So they make those creations together, and I think it's maybe it's is a kind of a symbol of their relationship. Maybe that was kind of Freddie thinking what Doodle would say in these situations or something like that.
John,
So
we are on the same wavelength, sir. Like I so when that happened with her and with Doodle specifically and that object, I was
right,
like, there's somebody in her world who can hear like
yeah,
and can respond. And the other time that it happens that she's meeting and I don't want to give too many details about this person, but there's a recurring character who you're not sure like where they sit in Freddy's life or who they
right.
will become, but it definitely feels like either a blossoming romantic thing or just the way that like teenagers like eyes wander. Even if you're
Right,
in
right.
love, you kind of like, oh, who are
Sure.
you? And she looks at a ring on this person's finger and the object speaks to her. And it's
Oh yeah,
like,
yeah,
oh, I like gasped because it was like
yeah.
that moment when two people like connect like on a
Right,
more intimate level. So I think you're right on about the stuffed animals kind of being the internal monologue that she can always like materialize for herself.
right,
They're constantly chirping at her when Laura Dean is there, almost as if they're like panicking a little bit. And I think that's how Freddie's inner life feels like, because there's all these moments where, we're kind of like, it feels sometimes cinematic in that you can see more of the frame, but really
right.
Freddie's very tunnel visioned on Laura. Um, and I think the panel that you brought up earlier, Producer Patti, where her friends slowly start to like disappear from the frame. And we were talking about how she becomes like not as good of a person. And she
Right.
just, like it's there in the background, almost as dramatic irony, but we're still very much in the perspective of of Freddy, who foregrounding, like, it's
Yeah.
Laura, Dean, and Freddy. And like that's
Yeah.
really all her world is, but there's
Yeah.
obviously other things happening in the background.
I wanted to think of, before we leave the talking animal, stuffed animals bit, because I thought of one thing as we were talking. I'm going to do a deep cut here. There was a
Yes.
television show that Brian Fuller, the guy who did Hannibal and Pushing Daisies, did, called Wonder Falls.
Yes.
It was a show called Wonder Falls on,
Mhm.
I think it was on the CW or something at that point. But the entire premise of that show is this jaded, cynical woman who one day
Mhm.
all the inanimate objects in her life that have faces start talking to her and telling her to do stuff, and have this running commentary throughout her life. That's the entire
Mhm.
premise of the book. There isn't direct connective tissue here other than the inanimate objects talking to her. In Wonder Falls, she's wondering if it's God or if it's the devil or if somebody's making her do something or if she's crazy. Here, it's a little bit, I think it is symbolic of internal monologue that is happening within Freddy. But
Mhm.
a fantastic show if you can see it, and if you can find it. And it was cut too short; didn't even make a full season. But it's by
Yeah.
a genius creator, and it's a fantastic program if you can
Is he
dig it out.
Canadian too? Because
I think he is, because
it's
the
about the woman's in Canada, right? It's called Wonder Falls because they're in a Niagara
yeah,
Falls gift
they're in
shop.
Niagara Falls, and I don't know if they. It seemed nice, so they're probably on the Canadian side. So
Yeah.
that's a good guess. But I'm not 100% positive if they ever specified whether she was in Canada or in there. The production company was Canadian, so maybe it was supposed to. It's like Schitt's
Okay.
Creek. They never really
Right.
say, because then that makes it
Yeah, it's
sell
like
easy in both places. It could
mhm,
be.
mhm. It's
Um,
universally somewhere in North America. Yeah.
yeah. So
Very cool.
you don't have to specify to make the show work.
Right.
So yeah, so I think that's good. I think we talked a little bit about the style of art. It is somewhere in that kind of manga American blend. It's somewhere in between. I think there's some aspects of it that are getting pulled from there, because we're not getting the, almost all Western comic art is, you can just trace straight back to Jack Kirby. It's all Jack Kirby
Mhm.
style designs and things. Completely not this. That is not where this is coming from at all. With more realistic proportions, like you were talking about, more real looking people, under dramatic rather than over dramatic, but incredibly expressive in face and body posture and things like that.
Mhm.
Uh, it can be subtle in a way that most comic art is not subtle. I really enjoyed that. And I don't know if I have a bunch of theories about this, but you mentioned it briefly. Let's talk about it. The
Yeah.
color in the book. It
Mm.
is a book that is in color, but only two. I mean, if we're counting black as one of the colors, she uses black and this kind of peachy pink color as a accent color. I mean, somebody might
Mhm.
call it a duotone or something like that. Um, so, my memory from I used to work in magazines, was that if you were going to the color press, you could have all the colors for free. So this wasn't a budgetary decision. This was a design choice. I'm not sure
Mm.
I have a solid reason that they did this, other than it looks pretty. This is normally where I'd look to Vivian. It works fantastic.
Sure.
There used to be people that thinks, oh, if it's not in color, that just means it's cheap, or it's not, they couldn't
Uh,
afford it. But that isn't the
mhm.
case here.
Right.
It's a very stylish looking book. They use that pink to accent things, to draw your eye in different panels and stuff, and it works pretty well. I don't know. What did you think about it? I thought it was worth noting. I don't know that I have a big theory on it or anything like that.
Yeah, I think I agree with what you're saying, and I think I'd probably have to read it 6 more times to really see the through line. But it felt to
Right.
me kind of like a highlighting like element where like Schindler's List, which like I don't know
Yeah.
how these exist in the same universe, but the girl in the red dress, and
Right.
like your eye is drawn to these things. So there's moments where the pink, like in this frame in particular, takes over, or in other
Right.
times where it's just um like all the objects on the floor, and like the black cat that she has, right? It's like the nose is pink and the ears are pink, right?
Right.
So it gives it like what I feel is like a more youthful energy too.
Right.
Obviously like uh when we're thinking about gender stereotypes and pink being associated with like women, but I think that they're like subverting that all the time. Like it just the way that
Yeah.
it's constructed, the author and the artist, like, oh man, look at that. Like um who's in pink and who's in the black and white here, right? Within
Right.
the frame itself. And everything's kind of switching off. And then
Right.
on the bottom frame. So this is that moment where you're talking about
Yeah.
where the frames are there's just each individual frames are telling the story of the
Right.
distance that's being created, and suddenly like they're fading to the background, these friends that are kind of like
It's
with her and they're parting ways. Like,
it's a beautiful visual metaphor. I mean, again, this is grade A storytelling. I mean, you have to pay attention to these drawings. You can't just blow through looking for words. You're
yes.
getting the story here, and that is taking full advantage of the medium. You're not just relying on words. If you're just going to write words and someone draws pictures with it, you can have a book with illustrations. When you're talking
Mm-hmm.
about comics, the pictures have to be as important as the words to the story. And in this case, it really, really is. And yeah, that incredible visual metaphor down at the bottom, a great use of her secondary color, of making those people fading into the background by not giving them any hard black edge definition. I mean, they're not just filled in that color. They are literally fading out of existence there in the background, and it's showing
Mm-hmm.
both from the direction that they're facing. You know, she's going one way with Laura Dean, her friends are all going the other way, and then
Mm-hmm.
Laura Dean and her are very crisp and easy to see, and her friends are fading away. It's an incredible way to sum up what is happening in the story without having to sit there and do this clunky exposition telling us what is happening in the story. And because Freddie's an unreliable narrator for a large part of it,
Mm-hmm.
I think at some level she knows that this obsession she has with Laura Dean is unhealthy, but she doesn't see it in the moment, the bad choices she's making that are alienating her friends, even as we, because we're standing back from it a little bit, can see her friends sometimes in the background just kind of giving up on her because she was supposed to meet them or she was supposed to do something with them, and Laura Dean like snaps her fingers and Freddie runs off. Uh, it
Right.
yeah, it's
Or
a
switch, but yeah.
great yeah. There was a lot of
Yeah.
good metaphor in this book. I thought that they both visual, like we just saw there, and then
Mm-hmm.
more concrete metaphors, sometimes intentional, and sometimes it was a metaphor that in a story that someone was telling, and then sometimes it was in the story that we're reading. I'll tell you what I meant about the story we're telling. There is
Mm-hmm.
a one that I love. Her best friend is a girl named Doodle. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and again, one of the most awesome comic names of all time. I love Doodle. And she tells a story about a guy in Ohio that thought he was locked in his house. And so he got a axe out and was chopping his way through the door to get out of the house. And then the police showed up, and it turned out the house was unlocked. And she was trying to get that across, and she's looking at Freddie to get some reaction from her, and it just goes like this over Freddie. She's talking about Freddie's relationship with Laura Dean. Freddie keeps talking about the fact she can't leave Laura Dean. She knows that she's should and that she should be done with her, and she doesn't know how to do it. And she's saying, "You're making it so hard. Just walk out the door. The door is opened. All you have to do is open it and walk through. It's not locked. You're not trapped there, like you're making yourself out to be." And yeah, it was a story told with a point. It had a embedded metaphor that where Doodle was really trying to help Freddie, and Freddie completely misses the point of it. Does not understand why they're talking about the story at all. Just is too myopic in her focus, frankly, on Laura at that point to get that Doodle was trying to tell her something important.
Right.
And yeah, um,
Yeah. No, I think like thank you. Thank you, Sizzle. I agree. Like that scene was actually really painful to read, and it's funny because you're experiencing this, like, sometimes when you're watching movies, like you're you're immersed because of the experiential nature of movies, but
right,
here, like, you're able to kind of like have separation, just like a novel, like where you're
right,
you're reading words and you realize that this is happening, but the empathy that you have for these characters is really strong, just because
yeah,
maybe you've also experienced something similar, but like, facing her phone the whole time. And it cuts
yeah,
between Doodle like looking and then Freddie on her phone and just
right,
waiting for the text that she's looking for from Laura Dean. And
right,
the connection and the disconnection is so clear. Like,
yeah,
like you're just like, I actually found myself kind of yelling at the book, the way that I yell at movies, like don't go into that dark basement. I was like, no, don't go see
Yeah.
her. Like, I think one thing that was, to kind of go back to the perspective issue, with, you said Freddy's an unreliable narrator, and it's so true, right? Like they do
Right.
it visually, but they also do it plot wise in terms of
Right.
like, what's the deal with Lordine? Because
Yeah.
for so much of it, you see her in singles and you see
Yeah.
her as this cool girl. So you get to
Right.
see her as the way that Freddy sees her, but you're also like, I know you, kid. Like, there's something
Yeah.
here about you that is a little bit broken, that is making other people break as well. And so you don't get to see that. And I'm not going to say anything plot wise. Like, this is very hard, but
Mm.
it's as Freddy's discovering things, you're discovering things. And I think that's really valuable when you think about the aim of the book
Right.
is to explain toxic relationships. So
Yeah.
yeah, you have these two themes of like visual metaphor and also the explicit storytelling that's happening.
Right. That's an interesting point, though. I was just thinking about it as you're talking through. We were talking about how the art carries the story at some point. The explicit story in text is all stuff that Freddy is aware of and from Freddy's point of view. But every now and then we see the secondary story, which is her friend's point of view, going on in the background, and we see that Freddy doesn't see it. That's how we, as the audience or as the readers, get information or see things that Freddy is unaware of, that she should be aware of, because we can see things in the background and we see that Freddy's not paying attention to him, and we're going, "Oh, come on, Freddy, just look up. Doodle is dying over there. She wants you to pay attention to her, and you're not doing it." So yeah, that was another way they used art to tell the story.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
Another thing I wanted to talk about is her parents, mom and dad. We see them a
Mm.
couple times, and Mom is definitely a role model. I like Mom. We get a couple pieces of information. They're not huge characters, but the mom has a what you call it? She mentioned that she kept her last name at one point. That she didn't take the dad's last name. Laura Dean assumes that she is Mrs. and I don't remember Freddie's last name, but he assumes that she is just has taken the husband's last name, and then she kind of wryly comments afterwards, that I didn't do that. The dad thinks Laura Dean is fantastic, even after seeing that Freddie has been torn up by her multiple times. He's buddy pally with her, and Freddie tells a story about how they were all watching Sister Wives, which is fantastic programming. But the I know the show exists, but it's about a polygamist family
Hmm.
in Utah, I assume. But and there was a point in there where all four of the wives were angry with him, and they were all crying, and uh, the mom and Freddie were like, "Oh, that's horrible," and the dad says, "I feel bad for him, not," and that's kind of the dad actually kind of sympathizes with Laura Dean. He's I wasn't sure what I was supposed to think of him. It seems like he obviously cares. He's not like he's philandering or anything like that,
Mm.
but he is oblivious to the harm that Laura Dean represents and is doing,
Right.
and we see that through both his friendliness with her after how badly she's treated her daughter, or his daughter. Got to get my pronouns right there,
Yeah.
and we also see it in this story. I thought that was the reason that story existed, is because there's a parallel there, because
Mm.
Laura Dean has 4 or 5 sister wives. That's the keep breaking up with me. She's constantly
Mm.
cheating with her on the side. She catches her multiple times in the book making out with other people or ghosting her, and then she shows up at the same party that she's at, and she sees she's over there and won't. She hasn't been returning her texts or says she has
Mm.
practice. Um, it's there's a lot of gaslighting and what the I only know this because I'm on the internet, but negging. There's a lot. Laura
Yeah.
Dean is constantly undercutting Freddie's confidence and undercutting her other relationships and making her feel unsure of where she stands as a way to control her. And it works for a vast bulk of the book. Instead, by treating her poorly, it just causes Freddie to work harder to try to prove worthiness and to try to fully get Laura Dean's attention, rather than her saying, "Why am I being treated poorly? I deserve better than this."
Mm-hmm.
It gets her to work hard to maintain a relationship that honestly, Laura Dean's not that into. So,
Mm-hmm. Or she just, because they're also young, and I think that's what's hard to remember sometimes, because like, and for most people with teenagers, right, because teenagers nowadays, like, they're in the know, they like
right,
have so much knowledge that I was like, I don't think I was that mature. Like, maybe when I was in my 20s I like got
yeah,
there, like, about some of these issues and topics and thinking about toxic relationships, but like,
right,
you know, um you only get really small hints of what Laura Dean's going through, and just, you
yeah,
know, uh, but I think once, like, what they do again with framing is like Laura Dean gets all these singles and she's like
right,
this very singular figure, and then you're on Freddie's face for a lot of the emotion she's going through, and then there's one moment on, like, I don't know if we'll be able to pull it up, but on 278, like, she just gets this single whole frame to herself to kind
right,
of finally express something that may
yeah,
have been hidden. I'm not going to say how it happens, but like,
yeah,
like, I think it's it's like watching a master class in like
yeah,
how to explain teenage emotions, because I think like there's a distance that we experience. I do want to
yeah,
come back to the dad and the mom, because I think what the other thing that's happening in this book is there's a lot of like little relationships. Like, there's two, I'd say
right,
two major relationships that are, that, you really can sink your teeth into, and then there's
right,
all these kind of side stories that are happening, and one of
yeah,
them is with the mom and the dad, and you're kind of asked to like interpret it. And I wanted to hear from you, John, because I think like it's easy to villainize certain people or certain types of
right,
people, especially when we're thinking about heroic girls, right? Like,
yeah.
oh, the guys are always going to be bad, the girls are always going to win. Here
Well,
Laura Dean is kind of
you
maybe,
visited
I
our
don't want to
Facebook
say.
page, but
Right. And it's and I think it's important to bring nuance, right? We have the narrative
right.
plenitude to say
Oh, you're breaking up just a little bit, Vanessa. So
a
pause.
little toxic, she's so
There you
young. Oh,
go.
we got back. Okay, so Laura Dean's
You're
like a
back
little bit
now.
toxic. Oh phew.
Right.
Ah, hopefully my words will live forever somewhere. But
Okay. Yeah.
in amidst the blips that are happening. But I guess like the
Right.
other thing with the dad and those reactions, like, it's all adding to this kind of larger picture of like you
Right.
said, like, what are the imprints for what we understand to be
Hmm.
healthy relationships. And
Right.
suddenly when you have that realization, like when your
Right.
parents are human, like, you're like, oh, there's a little bit of
Yeah.
a shock factor that comes in. So I think um all the friends are actually going through like specific things to kind of go take a step back and like say that this is not a singular thing that will last forever, or that it's not the
Right.
ideal, right?
Yeah. And you see the friends having external lives that are not completely revolving around the issue with this relationship. They're concerned about it, but they also have their own stories that are going on in the background, rather than, a lot of like rom-coms and things like that. It's like, the guy's best friend just follows him around trying to get him set up with a girl the entire movie, and you're like, do you have anything else that you do? And that is not the case here. That is not the
Right.
case here. Her friends have other things going on, and not only are they being used to advance her plot, which I think would be a standard thing. There are times when they need her to help advance what they have going on in their lives, and she's not
Mm,
there for them.
mm,
So it's uh, a fuller world than we get a lot of the time, where a lot of times everything in the book services one main plot. In this, we have a lot of side strings and threads and things going on all over the place. And yeah, I didn't know what to think about the dad. I didn't want to dislike him because, again, he's her father. He's stayed with the mom. I mean, if you take it to its conclusion, if we're comparing him to Laura Dean, well, Laura Dean is a philanderer. I mean, she's just all over the place, and the dad doesn't appear to be doing that. But he is oblivious. He's really oblivious to certain aspects of how relationships work, and yeah, maybe that was something. Maybe they always say that people pattern what they expect in a relationship after seeing what they see in their parents. Maybe that's where some of that came from. I don't know if that is fair to lay at the dad's feet, but yeah, there were a couple people like that in the book that had other issues going on, and the dad was definitely one of them. That I chewed on it for a little bit. What am I supposed to think about the dad? It was obvious that the mom could see through Laura Dean and had the assertive type of personality of I'm going to be my own person, which is what Laura Dean did not want Freddie to be. Freddie was an accessory. She was a handbag that Laura Dean carried around with her. That was basically what she was to her. And she'd pick her up and drop her at the drop of a hat, and then later on she'd go, "Oh, I want to use that again." She'd pick her up again, and with just no care at all, the devastation she was leaving in her wake emotionally to poor Freddie. And yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know exactly what we were supposed to take away from the dad. I just, other than we're living in an imperfect world and sometimes people don't have all the answers. So did you get
Yeah.
anything more from it than that?
I think, like there's moments where we get like echoes of other things, right? So in the sister wives and the kind of polyamory discussion,
Right.
that there's like, well, like I kind of identify with this man who has more power, which like
Right.
that's what he's socially conditioned to be, and he's also socially
Mm.
conditioned to like the cool kid, right? Like
Yeah.
Laura Dean is just charismatic and magnetic. But I
Right.
think the other thing that happens is that when he's told like pay attention, he will pay attention. But like
Right.
there's some things like the romantic gesture where she's like he starts dancing with her in the kitchen. She's like, what'd be more romantic is if you
Yeah.
helped me cook, right? Like, and
Right.
so I feel it is not just a comment on the dad, but also for the mom who's saying, I have a particular need that I'm
Right.
expressing, right? And so she's able to have that discussion. Whereas I think, like Freddie was subliminating that. But I
Right.
want to kind of use this discussion of the mom and dad to talk about the universe more generally. Can we do that? Because I feel like one of the things that like Rosemary and Mariko are
Right.
doing is creating this whole world that feels very full, right?
Right.
That there's this
Yep.
place called Berkeley, people
Yep.
who D&D and who do vintage toy shopping. And, I think this is one of the other beautiful things about this book is that, like you mentioned rom-coms, right? And you have like these
Right.
characters that just, follow everybody else, but it feels really full, right? And so
Hmm.
it's something that just deserved like 5 more readings at least. I mean, like what did
Yeah.
you like about where they were setting wise?
Again, it was something that both of us have mentioned. It is that complete fullness of the world around them. And number one is something I already mentioned. But the setting in Berkeley was able to make it feel both true to life and also not be oppressive for the LGBTQ plus community, which is so omnipresent in the book.
Mm-hmm.
There are other settings where that would have felt a little false. It does not feel false here.
Mm.
Um, yeah, I loved all the business going around her because even if it doesn't directly address the main storyline, it tells us something about Freddie in almost every case. Or you see opportunities for Freddie to distance herself or to see things from another point of view that she doesn't always take advantage of, but we can see that. There is the character. There's a that you mentioned earlier, and you didn't want to give too much away, but she's a big enough character. I think we can at least talk about her. There is V as a waitress that she almost throws up on early in the book,
Oh man,
and
that was epic.
and, and she keeps showing up. There are a couple people in there actually that have multiple jobs at different places, and she keeps running into her at different jobs. She works at a diner, she works at the bowling alley, and I think there's one other place that she works at that she runs into
Coffee
during the
shop, I
book.
think.
Coffee shop, yeah. She's when and then it's not just like a conceit for the book like it would be in like a Japanese harem manga or something like that where it's just like you
Mm.
keep running into this person.
The meet
She's a
cute, yeah.
yeah, the meet cute and the just economy of characters where they just keep a way to keep them surrounded by the same people. In this case, we get an in-world explanation that reads very true, which is I'm going to college and I need to work these jobs in order to be able to afford it.
Oh
And I went,
yeah.
that's completely believable to me because that is the kind of odd jobs. Those are all the type of jobs you would pick up as a college student trying to make ends meet while you're going to school. So, yeah. So, and again, I want to point out that we are in the most lesbian of all universes, and so most of the people that she meets are gay. But the waitress is a person that is showing. I think she existed to show us the world that could exist after high school. If you can just break free, if you can just get through high school, you get to college, the world opens up to you. That I always have felt that's true. I mean, people that are having a miserable time in high school, if you're that person, just make it to college, and all of a sudden you don't have to see the people that make your life miserable if you don't want to. You can freely choose to associate with who you want to associate with, and it just makes your world so much better in a lot of ways if you're having a
Yeah.
bad time. And yeah, I think she kind of represented the kind of person that Freddie would like to become, or that should become, maybe. And yeah, she seemed almost like I don't know, a muse in a Greek play or something like that, there to try to provide guidance at key moments in the story.
Sure. Yeah. I hadn't really even thought about that because I think there was a connection that they had that was, definitely like you're my people, right? That
Yeah,
moment with the ring. And there is that moment where you see somebody and you can see yourself mirrored in them. And so
yeah,
when they say something to you, it also means a lot more.
right,
What I think is really interesting, um, and you're talking about this being like a very lesbian universe. I think like definitely generally it's very queer, but then the way that they also not just with populating the characters, but like what she imagines this place to be and how Freddie sees it is
right,
just really full of life, but very urban
yeah,
at the same time. I just wanted to kind of like point out really quickly, like there's a lot of storefronts. There's like birds, like cut to birds, like flying
right,
in the sky. There's so many plants, and I think that's one thing why I'm circling back to that is because Vivian was like, they use plants as a framing device. And so I was kind of clued into like, as I was turning the page, like where do plants
yeah,
appear? And it's almost like every other page, like to kind of not just fill the frame, but um like
yep.
that like exists in a row. Sorry, did I cut out?
You cut out there for about
Sorry, I'm
3 seconds.
coming from my parents' bedroom. So or my room. Oh, this is a perfect. So like any chance they get, and I don't know if this is a discussion between the author and the artist, but like it's filled with plants. So that was
Yeah,
another way of making me kind of stop and go to
mhm,
kind of look at the depth of the frame, the kind of details that are happening. You go, oh, like this is a world that's not just like I move from A to B, like
right,
this is a place where there's like a lot of living things. And in
hmm,
this very queer universe, like plants play a big part. Like even in Doodle's D&D club, like
yeah,
there's a little
the door,
cubby hole, right? The door, and it has plants in the middle. And I
right,
mean, it kind of gives you a sense of Berkeley, of Oakland, of the East Bay, and how in these urban spaces, like they are um, reclaiming it with just all these plants and flowers and beautiful
yeah,
things. And, that's happening at the edges of all these frames of like heartbreak, you
yeah,
know? So it gave me a sense of like real place for
yeah,
Freddie and the kind of like life that she's living. But whether or not she really notices it is also the question, right?
yeah. Yeah, I do think, and that felt very real to me. I've never lived in the Bay Area because I'm not made of that kind of money. But
Right. Who
the
is?
but in Sacramento we lived in Midtown for a while, which is also I know that vibe. There are all these people that started urban gardens and their front lawn. It's just just this lush jungle of different plants and things, trying to transform the space into something a little more unique and interesting and alive than just a bunch of lawns or something like that. So I understand that aesthetic. It exists in the real world, and it felt very real to me, living just an hour and a half away in somewhere I can afford. And yeah, I wanted to talk about some of the other metaphors and things that are
Sure.
in the story. And I don't know whether I've had a couple notes of things that I thought might be something, but I weren't sure there was something. So
Okay.
um, there was at the very beginning of the book where we open with the first letter to Anna Weiss, who is the
Mm,
advice columnist, and in there she's telling about herself. And one of the things she says is that she likes the smell of strawberries, but she does not like the taste of strawberries, which is an
mm.
interesting observation. I thought uh, Freddie has a rich interior life. I appreciate that about her, that she has
Right. What an
that
opening
going on.
line.
And then way farther in the book, um, she the first time she meets and connects with
Mm.
Laura Dean, the first thing that she says is, "You smell like strawberries," which I went, "Oh, yeah, I remember that from way back in the book." And I said, "She smells like strawberries, but she doesn't like the taste." And is that like some sort of oblique metaphor for the fact that she likes the idea of being with Laura Dean, but the taste of the actual thing itself is not good for her, or she doesn't like, or I don't. And
Mm.
maybe it was just complete randomness. I was so hard trying to make connections between those two in my mind because we mentioned the smell of strawberries in both cases. So
Yeah. Yeah, that how sorry. I'm just enjoying the frame because like it's full, 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 and then there's all this negative space.
right,
But you know, the way that I read that was that she has subconsciously almost eaten Laura Dean's kind of thoughts. Like
right,
she's made them her own in the way that like people kind of like are subconsciously influencing you and what your
right.
tastes are. Like if you don't
Oh,
have strong preferences, like if you're still kind of somebody who can be imprinted upon, like
yeah,
there's something about the draw of Laura Dean. Like maybe she's never liked strawberries, but the moment she
right,
was told you smell like strawberries, like
right,
something clicked for her that
right.
this is something I like too, you
Kind
know?
of subverting her sense of self to Freddie's. Or not to Freddie's. I'm sorry, other way around to Laura's. Freddie's.
Yeah.
Yeah, just yeah. That's a good interpretation of that. I
Uh,
like that.
No, I'm glad you brought it up. I think that's like there's so many like little there's so much that's happening in terms of content that like you kind of lose the thread because it's always building, but they also
Right.
stand alone in a lot of ways, right? Like
Yeah.
we could talk for an hour about the animals, right? Like
Yeah.
literally that's how like the view through the thank you bag, which in the thank you bag, right? You're looking
Right.
from the inside out, not the outside into the bag, right? Which is kind of
Right.
like tells you whose perspective it is. But
Right.
what were some other themes that you were thinking about?
I mean, themes is really strong to put it. Just like little notes I took when I noticed things.
Mm-hmm.
And she met Laura Dean when they were square dancing at school, and so my immediate thought about square dancing, anytime it's brought up now, is that square dancing has its history in racism. It's well, there's that, but
Mm.
square dancing was invented. It did not exist by Henry Ford because kids in the I think it was like the 20s or 30s were starting to dance to black music. Couldn't have that, so we needed. He promoted this big program to bring white cultural values, and square dancing was something they basically made up, and then he got all the schools to teach it. It didn't really exist in the real world. It's an artificial thing that we think is some old folk thing. It's not. And schools still teach the stuff today, which is just bizarre to me because there are still stories. I mean, I think well, maybe not everybody anymore. I remember at least doing it once when I was in grade school. They had everybody, partner up in do-si-do. It's
Mm-hmm.
also a dance where you keep swapping partners, which Laura Dean's certainly very comfortable with. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Oh, and I remembered one other thing I wanted to talk about, but you were on a good roll and I didn't want to interrupt. When we were talking about uh, you, Laura Dean kind of using Freddie as a thing, as a possession. Um, she on page 86 she says it's so multicultural to have an Asian girlfriend with a name like Frederica, and I was just like, man, I'm white, and that rubs me the wrong way so bad,
Uh,
but I just cringed. I
yeah.
was like, oh my god, how does that not just immediately have you walking out of the room? I mean, and again, it kind of fed into that idea that Laura sees her as an accessory to her life. That she just, it's neat that she has this person there, and she likes her being around, but she's not really that invested in her as a person. And yeah, I just you obviously would have way more perspective on it than I would. I mean, if you heard that come out of somebody's lips, what would be your impression of that person? I mean, it
Oh
just
my
struck me as
goodness.
so incredibly wrong. So
Right. Well, and then you think about the ways that you would react to something, but there's the 20-year-old you, there's the 30-year-old you, there's the 40-year-old
right,
year old you that I would have different reactions just depending on what the context was. No, that's a really good callback to square dancing. I actually didn't know the history of that, and I think that's one of the things that, like, when you think about like reading into texts, right, and you think
right,
about gender expectations, or you think about
mhm,
this is the way things have always been,
right,
then as soon as you say that, then let's examine that. Like, has it always been like that, right? We
right,
often think that, oh, well, this is a monolithic thing that has always been this way, which, we're continually reinterpreting history. And so, um, like, speaking of reinterpreting history, I know I would have, like, the me now would have been like, okay, like, peace out, bye. Like, but like,
yeah,
what do you sacrifice in, signing up to somebody that you're completely, you know, uh, just smitten by, and
right,
you know and to again, we talk
yeah,
about subjugating, like, your identity and your sense of self for that
right,
person. So I think she's aware of her cultural identity as like a mixed race person, but like she's
right,
like, I'll just grin and bear it, which is something that keeps happening. And you're with her, you are heightening your stress
right,
levels in watching this thing happen.
yeah.
But
It's
mhm.
I was just thinking the book is interesting from the sense that most books that you read, young adult novels or comics in general, the protagonist is a heroic figure in some sense. And this is one where we're really exploring weakness. We're exploring,
Mm,
uh, being the point of view of a victim rather than the person who is the savior or the person who has all their stuff together. I mean,
mhm.
teenagers are a mess just in general. I mean, I look back at things that
Right.
happened when I was a teenager. Uh, Certainly not as the target of mild racist comments, but they happened around me, and I remember trying to get my cues from other people in the room, how offended I should be or how I should react and things like that. And uh, this felt like a very kind of realistic moment for me, just not
Mm.
knowing, especially when you think it's the cool person that's doing it, of accepting it because you haven't got your own place in the world yet. You haven't figured out your sense of self. It's not strong enough really to keep together, particularly in Freddie's case, because she's very subservient to what she thinks Laura Dean would like her to be.
Sure. Yeah, no. I mean, and you said that while producer Patty, thank you, producer Patty, who's doing her best out there. Like, that single came up, right? And it's like,
Right,
how do you get from, this person who's always in the frame and in the forefront
right,
of your brain and in the panel, to this single of you being able to express yourself, right? And it's like, it takes so much, like,
right.
I won't say where in the book this is, but it definitely, she goes on that journey to
Yeah,
really find that. One thing that I want to point out in contrast to that is like some of the progressions of the frame. If you go to 279, which is the next page, it shows you kind of the ways that Mariko and Rosemary want you to sit in the emotions with the character,
yeah,
so that you're traveling with it, like almost in real time. This aspect of processing through an emotion, and it's a lot about looking, and they're looking at, and how are they actually engaged with the person that
right.
they want to be talking to. So, yeah,
Yeah.
no.
So we have just like a few minutes left before
Hmm.
we hit our hour mark, and it's not hard, but we'd like to keep it somewhere around there.
Sure,
So let's try to sum some things up. I mean,
sure.
I think this is one of the best young adult novels, and really, it's young adult up. I mean, I don't think that I did not feel like I was reading an Encyclopedia Brown or something going, oh, that's cute. This is a book that still speaks to me as an adult that I think
Mm,
is valuable that way, but especially I think would be good for teenagers. There is uh, there's no sex in it, but it is not just implied; it's stated that they're having sex. So you have
yeah.
there. I think there's some fairly strong allusions to it once or twice. It's not like it's filled with that. So if that's subject material that you feel uncomfortable with, if you were going to give it to a kid, just know that that's there. It explicitly says that they're having sex as teenagers, which, yeah, I have my own thoughts about that, but that's everybody's individual call. Just know that it's there, have that knowledge in your back pocket. But I just think this is such valuable information for anybody who's stuck in a toxic relationship. I mean,
Mm,
the advice columnist does come through at the end. We mentioned that, and that's kind of the cap on this. She's been writing letters to her over and over again, all the way through the story, and right at the end, the advice columnist gives her the advice. But it to me, it felt like Freddie had already made that decision. She had finally hit the point where she realized what was going on, and we got that framework going on. And yeah, so I think this is a book that kids should have as a primer for how relationships can go badly. We sell this, you know, glorified version of romance all the time to adults and to children, and
hmm.
we always get the like meet cutes, and then a bunch of misunderstandings, and hey, the guy's a stalker, but we like it because it's a rom com, and she said no 18
Right.
times. Keep going, and there's a lot of I think harmful tropes that you can learn from romantic comedies and the way romance is normally presented. This strips a lot of that veneer off and shows you don't give up everything about yourself in pursuit of a relationship that may not be good for you in the first place, even if you are in love with the person. I think it's great.
Right. And I think the other thing I'd like to point out is friendship is magic. Um,
Yeah.
just a little ponies callback. But I think in contrast to the toxicity of a one
Right.
relationship, there are relationships that are worth keeping, and
Hmm.
which one will you choose? Who are the ones that see you?
Right.
And also, like you said, the advice columnist comes back, but at this point, where is she in her journey to hear that type of advice, and does
Yeah.
it
It almost feels like it's Freddie's voice at that by that point. Freddie has figured
that's
it out.
always really fun. She's just constantly sending things out into the ether, and then suddenly there's a
Yeah.
response. But
Yeah, I was
yeah.
convinced
Oh man.
by the end of the book. I thought it was just another framing mechanism. We were never going to get a response from the. It was almost
Right.
like a journal or a diary at
I
that
almost
point.
forgotten.
Yeah, that it was that was a actual person that might respond, and
Hmm.
I think it is worth mentioning that we see glimpses of. You mentioned it a little bit ago of the humanity behind Laura Dean, and of course the dad gets more of that. But there's just a, a small glimpse at the end of what kind of broken person Laura Dean is inside, right
Mm-hmm.
towards the end of the book, and you can have some pity and empathy for Laura Dean because there's obviously something very messed up there, but it can't be Freddie's job to fix her, and especially at the detriment to everything that's going on in her life. And I think that's
Right.
another thing that's important to understand. Okay,
Yeah.
well, I'm
Woo!
getting
Did we
the
do
wave
it?
off. We did it. We got all the
Oh,
way through. So thank you guys for hanging out with us. Vanessa, thank you so much
oh,
for joining
absolutely.
us. Vivian, I hope you're having a good time in Hawaii. I wanted to be in Hawaii, but no, I'm here reading a book. It's a good book.
I know. Yeah, as long as
And
we're staying cool.
next month we did Mariko, so we are going to her cousin Jillian, and we're going to do Super Mutant Magic Academy. I believe this was a suggestion from Vanessa. I have not read this one, although I do think we put it on one of our best of lists a couple years ago. And it's supposed to be a fantastic book, a little bit younger skewing, I believe. Haven't read it, but I think it is. And yeah, so another fantastic book for next month. Get on it, get out, buy that thing, go to your local comic shop. They need your money. And
Yeah.
thanks, everybody. We'll see you next month.
Thank you for having me, everybody.
Bye bye.
Bye.